In our family, we never talked about the night of 1964. We knew only one thing. My grandfather never returned from his night shift at the museum. In the documents, everything looked simple, an accident. But sometimes silence says more than words. It appears where the truth is too heavy to be spoken out loud. For a long time, I did not dare to ask questions, because I knew if the answer ever appeared, there would be no way back. My name is Arthur Grayson. I work at the American Museum of Natural History in the Department of Mineralogy. I tell visitors about stones, about the age of the earth, about light frozen inside crystals. But I am here not only for that. I am here to learn the truth, no matter how cruel it may turn out to be. That night, I stayed alone in the museum. After closing hours, a silence settles in. A silence in which every mineral seems to sound clearer than it does during the day. At the center of the Hall of Gems stands the object I come here for every day. The Star of India, the largest star sapphire in the world, 563 carats. The sapphire is so large that it seems warm, almost alive. In the right light, a perfect six-rayed star ignites inside it and moves along with your gaze. Step to the right, it follows you. Step to the left, and it is looking straight into your eyes again. Most people think it is magic. I usually explain it simply. It is rutile. Thin, needle-like inclusions inside the stone, aligned so precisely that they intercept light and form a star. But this sapphire has something that is almost never found in nature. The asterism is visible on both sides of the stone. It is like having two night skies inside a single crystal. The sapphire is about 2 billion years old. Older than trees, older than rivers, older than continents. It crystallized in the darkness of the Earth's crust when the surface of the planet was still a sea of molten magma. It was found in Ceylon in the 19th century. The miners kept no records, but all of them repeated the same thing. The stone glowed even when it was first pulled from the ground, wet, heavy, and covered in clay. They were afraid to touch it with their bare hands and wrapped it in cloth, as if they were afraid to startle it. There is even a legend that the star fades if the stone is touched without respect. I like that legend. There is more truth in it than in many scientific papers. When you stand in front of the stone at night, you really do feel that it remembers. There is another rare property that is never mentioned during guided tours. The surface of the sapphire gives off a faint glow when the surrounding darkness becomes too deep. Not true luminescence, but something, almost like an optical error. Light that should not exist but sometimes does. Sometimes it feels to me as if the stone reacts to presence. Perhaps it is just professional deformation, seeing things where others do not. Or perhaps... That evening, I was working with materials for a new exhibition. The archive provided me with a folder of documents, catalogs, old photographs, technical descriptions. As I laid them out on the table near the display case, I noticed a thin gray folder among the papers. It had no markings. I had not requested it. I opened it and saw something I definitely was not supposed to see. For a moment, it even seemed to me that the light inside the display case held its breath. I did not know what it meant, but I knew one thing. This would change my work here forever. I stood there for a long time, looking at the stone, and for the first time, I felt that the Star of India was not just an exhibit, and perhaps not just a stone. When I tell visitors about the Star of India, I almost never begin with New York. The real story of this stone begins far from here, in Ceylon, on a humid riverbank where people stand knee-deep in water, searching for the sky and gravel. Imagine a morning in the 19th century. Dawn has not yet had time to warm the air, but the water is already glowing with gold, the kind of light that appears before a very hot day. The air is thick and heavy, smelling of silt and tropical flowers that bloom at night and wither by noon. The miners stand in the water with wooden pans in their hands. They scoop up gravel, rotate the pan, and let the water wash away what is unnecessary, for hours, for days, for years. Most of them will never find anything special, only small stones that barely justify the labor. But they continue, because each of them knows one stone can change everything. From a distance, it looks like an ancient ritual, one that has long lost its explanation, but is still being repeated. Hands move almost automatically. Eyes are tired of looking. The body remembers the motion on its own, and then one pan stops, not because of weight, but because of light. In the gravel lies a dirty, rough stone covered in red clay. There are hundreds like it, but when the miner turns it toward the sun, a star flares up at its center. 6 rays, even, sharp, clean, as if someone carved them deliberately. The star moves together with the light. It does not scatter. It does not blur. It does not merely reflect. It seems to live inside the stone. The miner freezes. Then he calls the others. They gather around, 5 or 6 men with the same expression, tension, and a trace of fear, because they have known the legends of star sapphires since childhood. To them, these stones are not just gemstones. They are signs, messages, sometimes warnings. The eldest miner takes the stone in his hands very carefully. He rinses it in river water, wipes it with the edge of his shirt. The star does not disappear. On the contrary, it becomes brighter. "This is not our stone," he finally says. "This is a stone that waited to be found." Later, geologists would call it asterism, explain everything with rutile and optics. But back then, on the riverbank, there were simply people standing and looking at a piece of sky in their hands, understanding that their lives had just changed. In Ceylon, a legend spread quickly. The stone shines by itself, does not like darkness, and does not tolerate dirt. It could not be placed loosely in a sack, only wrapped in cloth. They said that if it was dirtied or touched with unclean hands, the star would fade, and if it suddenly dimmed, it was a sign that something irreversible would happen. Some of these stories are easy to explain. Oil from the skin changes the way light refracts on the surface of the crystal. The star really can become less visible. But sometimes scientific explanations sound too cold when you read old records. Early traders described this sapphire as an egg made of light. One Englishman traveling through Ceylon on business left a few lines in his diary. "I saw a stone that does not tolerate unfamiliar hands. When I took it, the star inside dimmed. When I returned it to its owner, it flared again. The impression was that the stone chooses whom it trusts." Another note, already local. "After the touch of an unworthy person, the star grows dull. Objectively, this is still the same oil on the surface of the crystal. Subjectively, it is the feeling that the stone truly responds to a person. Then began a long period of wandering. The sapphire passed from hand to hand, from miners to middlemen, from middlemen to collectors. It was seen in Colombo, in Calcutta, in London, at private showings, and in offices where cigarette smoke mixed with the scent of polished wood. Some owners did not keep it for long. They said the stone was unsettling. One wrote in a letter, "It seems to me that there is always someone in the room when it lies on the table." Others, on the contrary, claimed that it was easier to breathe in its presence, as if it gathered scattered light and returned it in the form of silence. One collector even requested in his will to be buried together with the stone. The family ignored the request. The sapphire was quickly sold onward, and in his old house, as was written later, it suddenly became colder in the room where the casket once stood. This can be blamed on old wiring, drafts in the windows, anything. But such details persistently repeat themselves, and from them, legends are born. At some point, the Star of India ceased to be just an interesting stone and became a rarity of global significance. It was known in antiquarian circles, whispered about at auctions. It was too recognizable to simply hide it in a safe, and too powerful to let it go easily. It was then that a name appeared on the horizon that changed its path. John Pierpont Morgan. Not him personally, of course. First, his people. A representative traveling across Europe and Asia in search of unusual stones saw the sapphire at one of the private showings. In his report to Morgan, he wrote little, but it was enough. A sapphire of such size and quality that it seems impossible. The star is stable and does not break apart at different angles. There is an impression that the stone glows from within. I recommend acquiring it at any reasonable price. Morgan loved not numbers, but phrases like "seems impossible" and "glows from within." For him, gemstones were not ornaments, but fragments of the planet's history, a sapphire that had lain underground for millions of years, and suddenly found itself in human hands fit perfectly into this picture. From the moment Morgan's agent's eyes met the cold light of the Star of India, its local history came to an end. Another began, much larger. But that is already a story about oceans, ships, and America. About how a stone from the hot shore of Ceylon ended up under glass in the hall where I am standing now. Sometimes I think, perhaps I was drawn to work here, and with this particular stone, because I too am not someone who stays in one place for long, or perhaps because the Star of India, like some people, is never simply somewhere. It is always going somewhere, and it always pulls someone along with it. When the Star of India arrived in the United States, it was not yet a legend. It was just a stone in dark velvet, wrapped in a box made of boxwood, which smelled of honey and old books. The box was sealed with a metal plate bearing the initials JPM. Above the initials, a thin, six-pointed star. At the time, it did not seem strange. Today, it does. In the ship's cargo hold, the box stood quietly, but stories always circled around it, about warmth felt by sailors, about a beam of light that supposedly pierced the wood, about a night when a lantern flickered at the exact moment the box was carried away from moisture. Fantasies, of course, but it is from such fantasies that legends begin. After arriving in New York, The stone was immediately handed over to Morgan's people. The newspaper The Sun printed a short note on the third page. A treasure of an unusual nature has arrived in the port. Within it is a stone that is said to glow even in darkness. Journalists loved exaggeration, but even exaggerations sometimes turn out to be closer to the truth than we would like. John Pierpont Morgan was not an ordinary collector. He could acquire rare treasures the way others buy books, but he did it not for status, not for display. He believed that gemstones were witnesses to eras, that they remembered what no human had ever seen, and that hiding such beauty only for oneself was a crime. "Let people see," he used to repeat. And this was more than a phrase. It was a philosophy. When Morgan learned about the Star of India, he decided this stone had to be in America, not in a private safe, not in a collector's study, but in a place where hundreds of thousands of people could see it with their own eyes. The sum he paid seemed insane, but to Morgan it did not matter. The Star of India became the heart of his collection, and when the moment came to transfer it to the museum, it was not an act of generosity. It was an acknowledgement. The stone belonged to the world. The transfer ceremony took place quietly, without cameras. In the only surviving photograph, Morgan holds the stone in his hands, and the light falls in such a way that the star inside shines too brightly, almost alive. In the diary of one curator, a single line was preserved. It seemed that Morgan was not looking at the stone, but through it. The exhibition became the event of the year. Lines began forming before dawn. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. People brought folding stools. Newspapers printed extra editions. Photographers spent hours trying to capture the perfect shot. But on the film, the star looked different each time, sometimes dimmer, sometimes almost doubled. This was blamed on caprices of light. In the private notes of one photographer, I found something else. There is an impression that the stone changes its star depending on who is standing in front of it. In the official documents, everything looked ordinary. No sensations, no legends, just those small irregularities that accumulate around old exhibits. Quiet, almost unnoticeable, but it is precisely such minor deviations that tend to linger in memory. Twice, the lamps above the display case burned out during installation, simultaneously. Electricians found no cause. Service notes recorded a slight displacement of the light beam, although the illumination had been set perfectly. Small things, but they began to form an aura around the stone. Not mystical, but attentive. And it was on that very evening, among piles of ordinary papers, that I saw something truly important for the first time, but not about the stone. While I was working with documents, my gaze accidentally fell on that same folder. I picked it up and finally examined it carefully. Inside were old shift logs and staff lists from the early 1960s. Yellowed paper, typed tables, the names of guards. I flipped through the pages, expecting nothing in particular, until I saw a line that made me freeze. Grayson, Thomas Grayson. Year, 1963. Next to it, a duty note. Hall of Gems, night shift. I stared at those lines for a long time, much longer than I had planned. This was no longer just the story of a stone, and not just the story of a museum. It was the story of my family. And somewhere between these fragments, between service notes written by people long gone, a night began that was never spoken of in our home, a night that became a shadow, the night of 1964. And now it seems the time has finally come to read it. The year 1964 has always stood like a shadow between me and the Star of India. October 29th, the night because of which I work here, the night that took my grandfather and left behind a question for which our family had no answer. In the archives, this story sounds dry, almost polite. In real life, it does not. That evening, a quiet rain hung over New York. The city glowed with wet reflections of streetlights, and the air seemed to hold a static tension. The museum closed as usual. The last visitor left. The doors clicked shut. Security turned off the main lights. In the Hall of Gems, only the display case lighting remained, cold, white, even. My grandfather was on night duty in that wing. In the documents, he is listed as Thomas Grayson, night watchman. In our family, a name spoken in whispers. In the official logs of that day, there is a small but important note. One guard did not report for duty. This meant that my grandfather was left almost alone in the long corridors, where cameras were still only planned, and the alarm system was more an idea than real protection. That same day, much earlier, 3 young men had entered the museum. Jack Roland Murphy, Murph the Surf, Alan Kuhn, Roger Clark. Smiling, tanned, confident. They looked more like students or surfers than like people planning to steal a sapphire weighing 563 carats. They stood for a long time by the display case of the Star of India. In the report, the investigator wrote, "They appeared to be enthusiastic tourists. No one paid special attention to them, but there is one detail that I noticed only now, rereading the interrogation transcripts. One of them, Roger Clark, recalled, 'When we stood at the case, the star seemed brighter than earlier, like it was watching.' The investigator ignored this, wrote it off as nerves. I would have done the same, if I did not know that the Star of India really does look different when someone looks at it with intent. That night, they returned. They climbed up the fire escape. This was confirmed by marks left on the paint. A window on the 5th floor had been left open for ventilation. One small, forgotten detail in a building that housed priceless gems. The corridor was dark. Only red dots of emergency lights glowed in the distance. It was at this moment that a phrase appeared in the official documents that has held me for years. Access to wing confirmed by night watchman. According to the reports, my grandfather let them in himself. On paper, it looks simple. 3 men in work clothes showed identification, asked permission to conduct a technical inspection of the wiring, and my grandfather signed off. A signature that hung over our family for decades like an accusation. Some reports even add, the guard did not verify the credentials of unauthorized persons, and although there is a brief note about an attempt to call a supervisor, attempted to confirm, no answer. It changes nothing in the overall picture, in the version that was convenient to accept. What follows is described almost frame by frame. One of the criminals knocked off the lock. Another pried open the glass. The third wrapped the Star of India in cloth. Everything happened in minutes. In the interrogation transcript, there is a line that always felt foreign to me. "She's looking at us, boys." And the response, "Don't look back." Most likely, it was just nerves. The sound of breaking glass was heard by my grandfather. The reports say that he ran. I imagine it. An empty corridor, heavy footsteps, the cold air of the nighttime museum, and the moment when he sees the empty display case. And then he runs after them. Newspapers of that time wrote simply, "The guard failed to fulfill his duties. An error led to the theft." This is how the official story was formed. The documents state, "Body found at the bottom of service staircase C." Service staircase C. It is still here, steep, slippery, with metal handrails. Even during the day, it is easy to slip there. The report contains no details. None. Just fell. Died on the spot. Meanwhile, the criminals descended the same fire escape, got into a car, and disappeared into the wet nighttime streets of New York. The jewels were recovered fairly quickly. The Star of India was found in a bus station locker in Miami. The Midnight Star as well. The DeLong Star ruby bought back. When the stone was brought back, it was thoroughly examined. No damage, no traces. In the final report, there is a phrase, "The incident has been resolved." For the museum, yes. For the police, as well. But for the Grayson family, the wording was different. Responsible for access. Failed to verify identities. Facilitated entry. His death was noted in a single sentence. Nameless. Technical. I sit over these documents, reading them fully for the first time, and I understand why our family remained silent for so long. On paper, my grandfather was at fault. He let the criminals in. He failed to check documents. He ran after them and died because of his own mistake. And this version held for decades. I lift my eyes to the Star of India. It lies in the display case, calm, indifferent to human stories. Or is it? The light inside it is different tonight. Not brighter, not dimmer, just different. As if it, too, is reading something. As if it is waiting for me to reach the end. The official truth is simple. The stone was returned. The guilty were punished. And the guard made a mistake. But for some reason, and I do not know why, for the first time, I have the feeling that something important is missing from this story, as if between the lines there is another voice that no one ever heard. I look at the stone, and for the first time in all my years working here, it seems to me that it is looking back, not magically, not mystically, just attentively, like a witness who waited too long to finally give testimony. And only then, among all these papers and borrowed wording, I realized one more thing. All these years, we did not avoid the truth, because we did not want to know it. We were afraid to learn something about my grandfather that we would have to believe forever. And perhaps that is why, in our home, silence was chosen for so long. I mechanically turned the pages. The lines were already blurring. Dates, names, stamps, official phrasing merging into a steady gray noise. I was not looking for anything specific. I was simply turning page after page, as if hoping that the answer would appear on its own, somewhere between the lines. But only facts appeared. Cold, official, Convenient. I turned another page, and a thin slip of paper slid out from between the others, falling almost soundlessly. I bent down. The sheet was different, lighter, older, not attached to the file. There was no stamp on it, only an uneven inscription at the top, "Not for file." Inside, a few short lines, no emotion, no explanation. I read it and read it again. That was enough for the official version to develop its first crack. I was still holding the sheet when I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, the way people walk who have spent many years in night halls. I raised my head. An old guard stood in the passageway, a worn jacket of an older style, tired shoulders, the habit of staying close to the walls. I simply saw an elderly man who had clearly not come by accident, but he was looking at me differently, longer than necessary, as if something in the half-darkness did not quite add up. "Tom," he said quietly. I did not immediately realize that he was speaking to me. "Excuse me?" He blinked as if waking up. "Sorry," he said, looking more closely. "So, not you." His gaze slid over my face, the line of my shoulders, my posture. "Very similar," he added more quietly. "In the dark, almost identical." "Did you know my grandfather?" I asked. The old man nodded slowly. "Tom Grayson. Yes, we worked together. And on that terrible night, I was in the museum." He paused. "This is my last day here, by the way. Today I hand over my shift and retire." He glanced toward the display case. "After that incident, I asked to be transferred away from here. I couldn't look at that stone every day. It reminded me of too much." We sat across from each other. For a long time he remained silent, as if deciding whether he had the right to speak. "Your grandfather didn't trust them," he finally said, "from the very beginning." "But," I remembered the documents. "I know what's written in the papers," he interrupted calmly, "and I'm telling you how it really was." He slowly folded his hands. "When those three showed up, Tom was immediately alert. He wasn't foolish. He had seen fake credentials before. He tried to call management several times. No answer. Then he came up to me and said, 'Stay here, by the phone. If they call back, tell me immediately, and try again yourself.'" "And what did he do?" I asked quietly. "And he went to see what they were doing," the guard replied. "Not to catch them, not to play the hero, to keep an eye on them." He lowered his gaze. I heard the sound of breaking glass later. I ran, but he was already on staircase C. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a fall. He tried to stop them. The guard sighed. After that, everything moved very fast, too fast. The window was open. The alarm system, partially not working. Night security, minimal. If that had come out, more than one name would have gone down. "So they made one man guilty," he said quietly, "the one who could no longer object. It was easier to say negligence of a guard than to admit a systemic failure." He looked at me. "And the family was given a convenient version too, so there would be no questions, so everything would be forgotten faster." We were silent. "You should know," he added, "your grandfather didn't die because he made a mistake. He died because he did the right thing." He stood up. "It's time for me to go. I'm glad that someone from your family finally made it here. and he slowly walked down the corridor, leaving behind a silence that no longer pressed down. Only then did I understand why our family had not spoken about that night for so long. We were waiting for an answer we were not ready for. And when it finally appeared, it did not frighten us. It calmed us. I walked up to the display case. The light of the illumination slid across the glass, and a reflection appeared in it. For a second it did not seem entirely mine. Too familiar, too calm. And then I understood. It was just me, resembling him. And this time, there was no anxiety in it. I knew the truth about him and about myself. My grandfather was not guilty. He was real. And that knowledge turned out to be enough for silence to finally settle in our family.